other friends of the channel, including Pogren, Discipulo, and Meiji. Thank you all so much for providing the help in getting this guide done. I wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't for everyone testing things and submitting video footage. So thank you all very much. And again, thanks again to the Shaman Discord. This video serves as a supplement to the event Guide Part 1, where I go over updates and confirmations from the Classic WoW Beta for things like spell coefficients, spell, talent, and stat mechanics, weapon buffs, and a lot more. As with all of my guides, this will be available on ClassicWoW.live, and in a pinned comment below and in the description, you'll find a link to Google Slides if you want to go through the slide at your own pace, and timestamps so you can navigate this guide more efficiently. With that, let's get started. So again, this is part of a creator's story. I would first check out the Advanced Shaman Guide Part 1 and my Totem Guide, which is available on ClassicWoW.live or my channel, to get a basis for this guide, right? So most of the information from the Advanced Shaman Guide Part 1 is still relevant and valid for things like stats, racials, most of the spell coefficients, most of the mechanics, spell and imbue details, and totems. However, there are some idiosyncrasies and confirmations that we're going to be going over in this guide to supplement Part 1, because there are some core differences between Classic WoW and private server Vanilla WoW. So now let's go over what we're going to be talking about in this guide. We're going to be doing spell coefficients. We're going to be talking about internal spell scaling, which is something that's pretty interesting and at least new to most people. We're going to be going over our statistics course and weapon buffs again. We're going to be looking at differences in totem mechanics, talent, spell, and stat mechanics, glancing development, which I did not cover in Part 1, leveling and the new dungeon meta in Classic WoW, some changes to Ghost Wolf form, some known issues that have occurred in the beta and have not been rectified as of yet, and finally things that still require some testing. So before we get into spell coefficients, in general, let's go over some basics. Now, if you don't know a lot about spell coefficients, remember, not all of your spell power goes to your spells. In fact, spells interact with your available spell power through what we call spell coefficients. Here are two very easy examples. For a normal hard cast spell, you divide the cast time by the reference, which is 3.5, to get the spell coefficient. For instant casts, they are considered 1.5 second spells. You do 1.5 divided by 3.5. That's a crash course. That's not how all things are calculated. Spell coefficients have some weird, wonky idiosyncrasies that you need to know if you want to actually calculate them. There is a guide that Osgar and I have worked on together and a tool that we've created for downranking. I would check out the downranking guide and tool video on ClassicWoW.live, and there's also a written guide there as well. There's the video on my channel, and then there's a downranking calculator, which can be found at wowdownrank.com, and that was developed by Osgar. There's also a pre-level 20 penalty, so anything you learn before level 20 will be penalized when downranking. Also, it's good to know that some talents can affect spell coefficients while others do not. And we'll go over that as we go through each spell. So how did I test these spell coefficients? I tested them with every shaman spell, totem, and imbue with as many talents as possible. I did multiple replicates per spell, 15 to 30 reps depending on the spell. I did every available rank, and the beta was only up to level 40, so I was only able to do spells 40 and below. I accrued as much spell power as possible, and I compared with theory from the Theorycraft add-on and from what I found out with private servers. So this is a comparison between what was known back in vanilla, at least what was calculated back then, what was calculated on private servers. The point that needs to be made is that the beta itself is not like a private server. I can't spawn items in order to get the most spell power possible or the best items possible, so I was able to really only work with what I had. So I want to thank, if anyone is listening to this, from the beta PvE realm, people were very kind and friendly in either donating pieces of gear so I can get the right spell power or helping me obtain pieces of gear. So thank you very much for anyone who's helped me on the PvE beta server. A link to the spell coefficient spreadsheet that I created to calculate these coefficients is available in the description. Now, let's first go over the frost spells and the frost imbue, frostbrand weapon. Now for frost shock, I tested rank 1 and rank 2. The theoretical coefficient is 40.71%. That's the cast time 1.5, or it's an instant cast divided by 3.5, but there's a 5% penalty because it has a slow effect. And my tested coefficients are well within range of both private servers and the theoretical coefficient from the Theorycraft add-on. Notice that concussion does not alter the spell coefficient for frost shock. It'll increase the base damage, but not the spell coefficient. Now for frostbrand weapon. On private servers, I got 25% spell coefficient. Now from the vanilla Theorycraft add-on, it only should be 10%, and that's what I got. So it corroborates with the original vanilla. The private server that I tested was much higher, so that's something that's going to be a little bit different. Also notice that elemental weapons increases the spell coefficient of frostbrand weapon by 0.5% per rank. So if you have elemental weapons, you can get more out of your spell power for a Frostbrand weapon. Now for Flame Shock, which is unique because it's a hybrid spell, meaning that it has an initial portion and a periodic portion. Now in private servers, I got approximately 15% for anything above level 20 for initial, and 13% for periodic. The Theorycraft add-on and the private server actually corroborate there. However, what I've gotten on the Classic WoW Beta is much different. Pre-level 20, of course, there is a penalty. However, by rank 3, you can see that the initial portion is about 21%, and the periodic is only 10%. So on the beta, compared to Theorycraft add-on, the initial is higher, but the periodic is lower. Will that balance out? I'm not entirely sure, but as with Frost Shock, concussion does not alter the spell coefficient. Now let's take a look at the fire totems. There are 3 fire totems: Searing Totem, Magma Totem, and Fire Nova. We'll go to Searing first. On the Theorycraft add-on and on private servers, you get about 8%. However, on the beta, it's closer to 10%. So it's about a 2% increase. Notice that Call of Flame does not increase the spell coefficient for Searing Totem. For Magma Totem, we're supposed to get around 3.2% per tick. I got a little bit higher than that, closer to 4%. So it's close, that's why it's in yellow. It's within the margin of error, maybe a little bit higher on beta. Again, Call of Flame does not affect the Magma Totem spell coefficient. Now, Fire Nova Totem is very interesting. We're supposed to get about 15% for anything above level 20. We're getting less than that on the beta, around 12%. However, Call of Flame seems to affect the spell coefficient for Fire Nova Totem, increasing it, but not affecting the other fire totems. This is very interesting. I'm not sure if this is a bug, but definitely something to check out when Classic WoW launches. See if you can corroborate this same thing. Now moving on to Flame Tongue coefficient. This is very, very similar to Frostbrand weapon. We were supposed to get around 15% from private servers. Again, Theorycraft add-on corroborates the Classic WoW Beta with around 10%. And just as within Frostbrand, elemental weapons increases the spell coefficient by 0.5% per rank, up to a total of 11.5-ish% theoretical maximum. So again, if you want to get more out of Flame Tongue weapon, more out of the coefficient, if you have a lot of spell power, elemental weapons will not only increase its damage, but will increase the spell coefficient as well. Now let's move on to the nature spells. Lightning Bolt. Now Lightning Bolt is a 3-second cast without talents, so we're supposed to get 85.71% of anything above level 20, and that's exactly what we get. We are within the margin of error. Private server, theoretical coefficient, Classic WoW Beta, everything corroborates. Now, concussion, as with the shocks, concussion does not affect the spell coefficient. However, Storm Strike definitely does. So this is a kind of a weird result. As you know, Storm Strike will increase the damage dealt by your next 2 nature spells by 20%, but it seems to have a really big effect on the spell coefficient, increasing it to 120%. So this is kind of interesting. It's a 20% increase in damage, but the actual difference in spell coefficient is closer to 40%. So this is a really interesting result. This could be really cool when you're thinking about how to theorycraft like enhancement elemental combinations and raids, like the enhancement Storm Strikes and then the elemental shaman kind of works on top of that synergistically. It's kind of memey, it's kind of min-maxy, but just really interesting thing to keep in mind. A very similar thing exists when we look at Chain Lightning. Now we're supposed to get around 71.43%, which is exactly what we get on private servers and what we tested in the Classic WoW Beta. Same thing with Concussion, it does not affect the spell coefficient. However, Storm Strike does increase the spell coefficient for Chain Lightning. Not as much as it did for Lightning Bolt, but still it is an increase. Now for Lightning Shield. For a very long time, it's been thought that each orb receives 33% of your spell power, leading up to 100% spell coefficient for all 3 discharges. However, the Classic WoW Beta has shown that it's lower. It's actually around 27% per orb. But interestingly, with Storm Strike, you get up to the theoretical 33%. So it makes me think maybe somewhere way back in the day, someone tested this with Storm Strike off. I don't know if that's true, but it may have carried over until now. So we're at 27% normally. With Storm Strike, you're about 32.43%, close to 33%. Now, with improved Lightning Shield does not affect the spell coefficient. I also tested with Storm Strike and improved Lightning Shield to see if there's any kind of weird synergistic relationship, and there's not. It's still around 33%. Now moving on to Earth Shock. Earth Shock is very similar to Frost Shock, It is an instant cast, so it's 1.5 divided by 3.5 to get the spell coefficient, but like Frost Shock, it has an additional effect. It has a silence, so it actually loses 5% as a penalty. So that should be around 40%. Now, interestingly, the private server test I did was around 45%, so what it would be if it wasn't penalized, so maybe there was an error in the coding, but Theorycraft add-on calls for 40%, and that's what we get in the Classic WoW beta. As with the other spells, concussion does not affect the spell coefficient, but interestingly, unlike the lightning spells, Earth Shock doesn't receive a Storm Strike bonus to its coefficient. It's still approximately 40%. It's about a percent higher, but that could be due to sampling error. I don't think that's enough to really make a call, so 40% it is for Earth Shock. Now moving on to the healing spells. Let's do Healing Wave first. Healing Wave is a 3-second cast. Theoretically should receive 85.71%. It corroborates all the way through. Actually, all the healing spells, there really is not much to cover here, but one thing important to cover is that Purification does not affect spell coefficient. It increases the effectiveness of your heal, but does not increase the spell coefficient. So Healing Wave gets what we thought it would, as does Lesser Healing Wave and Chain Heal. Lesser Healing Wave should receive 42.86%, we're well within that range, and Chain Heal should receive 71.43%, and again, we see that as well. Purification also does not affect the spell coefficients of either of these spells. Last but not least, we have Healing Stream Totem. Healing Stream Totem should receive about 2.16% per tick, and we get very, very close to that, 2.37 to 2.11%. Again, Purification does not affect this totem spell coefficient. Alright, let's talk about internal spell scaling. This is a very interesting thing. So what I'm talking about here is scaling within ranks, not across ranks. So as you level, as your character levels, the effectiveness of your spells increases. It's almost like mini ranks. Now this affects Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, Weapon Imbues, Healing Spells, and possibly even Shocks. We didn't get a chance to test everything, but I do have a spreadsheet. The link is in the description so you can see what I'm talking about. This internal scaling occurs up until you receive the next rank. So for example, let's say rank 1 Earth Shock, it'll keep accruing additional min and max damage range until you are at the level where you will receive Earth Shock rank 2, and then it'll stop scaling. So this is an interesting thing. It keeps your spells more relevant as you level, and it really limits that stepwise nature that ranking has. What's really interesting is that I do not remember seeing this in tooltips in Vanilla WoW. I did not play Shaman though. This could have definitely happened and I just missed it. But in Classic WoW, in the beta, you'll see it right in the tooltip. You'll see the numbers changing each level. Now what's really interesting is that Pogren went back to our PTR based on a certain private server, and he was able to determine that internal spell scaling was also occurring, but it wasn't overtly shown in tooltips. So this is something that is likely core to Vanilla WoW. Private servers also coded it properly, but the only big difference is now we're seeing the changes. Definitely as you're leveling, just hover over your spells and look at the differences, and you'll see them actually increasing as you level. And this kind of plays into why weapon imbues are balanced, because you would think if I train my newest Flame Tongue at level 18, let's say, and then I got a Rock Biter at level 20, well, the Rock Biter has to be better, right? Because I learned it at a higher level. Well, this internal spell scaling would say that they keep them comparable at a much finer scale. So I think this internal spell scaling is a way to normalize things like weapon imbues and stuff like that. But I don't think this is just Shaman. I remember people talking about this on Paladins as well. I don't think this is just a Shaman thing. I would definitely look into this in your class as well, especially if they're a mana using class, and see if this is also occurring on your tooltips. Okay, it's now time for my favorite part of the guide, testing the weapon imbues. Now, if you remember from Advanced ShamanGuide Part 1, I did some ANOVAs, which analyzes the variance between weapon imbues, and I showed that it really doesn't matter, right? DPS is very well normalized across these different weapon imbues and across weapon speeds. So I wanted to test this again in Classic WoW Beta, obviously, because it's a different system, and it might have some core differences. So I did 10 replicates per weapon speed per imbue, and I tested across 9 weapon speeds. Now, I just want to say that I did all of the weapon speed in the first Advanced ShamanGuide because I was using a PTR and I was able to spawn weapons by key command. You can't do that on the beta. So what I did was I scoured the world, checked the auction house, checked guildies, got as many weapons as I could possibly get, and I was able to get across 9 weapon speeds. And I tested it with Flurry because I did not test with Flurry in Advanced ShamanGuide 1, and Flurry could have some important synergistic effects with Wind Fury, so I wanted to make sure I test that as well. And what I did was I put on my gear, white hitted the enemy and recorded the DPS. And the enemy I chose was the Sawtooth Crocodilus, because they're level 38, 39, I was level 40. Their armor value produces 31.2 to 32.7 physical damage reduction, which is pretty average. It's more of like a leather mail wearing, is just kind of what we're going to do. And the reason I picked something in the middle is because I didn't want to over-represent physical versus magical weapon imbues. The magical weapon imbues do much better on higher armor targets, and the physical weapon imbues like Rockbiter Wind Fury do much better on the lower armor targets. So I want to make sure I got in the middle. And I verified this with Beast Lord. Disciple was nice enough to go in there with his hunter and verify these armor values. So there is a spreadsheet to show you the tests that I did, and all of the math, and what I was wearing, and my talents and everything. So if you want to click on that spreadsheet, the link will be in the description. So let's get into what I found. First, let's look across all weapon speeds. So this is all DPS per weapon imbue averaged across all weapon speeds. So when you do that, there is no significant difference in DPS between imbues. To go over what this is a box plot. If you don't know how to read a box plot, there is a picture in the previous slide to show you what they are. But essentially, this is the spread of the data, and each color represents one of the imbues. So as you can see, there are 4 A's on top. And what those letters mean is that if a box plot shares a letter with another box plot, they are not different from each other statistically. Okay, I'm using a ANOVA and an alpha value of 0.05 as a cutoff for my statistical significance. So there is no difference when you look across weapon speeds. But what if we look within weapon speeds? The next slide shows that. Green line is Rockbiter, blue is Frostbrand, the orange-red is Flametongue, and the purple is Wind Fury. Across the x-axis are the 9 weapon speeds I tested, going from 1.4 to 3.8, and DPS on the y-axis. Don't look at the increase from 1.4 to 3.8. That's due to the weapon's DPS. What you're really interested in is comparing the 4 weapon imbues within the dotted lines. Now what you'll probably immediately notice is that Rockbiter consistently had the highest average DPS. However, Wind Fury's effectiveness scales with weapon speed. The slower the weapon was, the closer Wind Fury became to the top weapon imbue and closer to Rockbiter. This is very important to realize because I did not see this on private servers. And there could be a lot of credence to the idea that the slower the weapon, the more impactful Wind Fury could be because of the huge variance in attack damage that can occur with Wind Fury weapon procs. Remember, the slower the weapon speed, the higher the top end. So if you are Wind Fury proccing, the ability to do a lot of damage occurs with slower weapons with Wind Fury. Another thing you'll notice is that Flametongue weapon consistently does not do well. It doesn't scale with weapon speed at all. Faster weapon speed does not mean it's a better thing to use. Classically, a lot of people have thought that Flametongue scales great with faster weapons, and that just isn't the case. It's being outperformed in almost every scenario. Frostbrand to me is a much better magical thing to use, and we'll get into that as we go into each weapon speed. But just to take home messages that I've seen so far from that. So just have a look at this graph, see what is happening. So we're going to go over 9 more slides with each weapon speed, but this kind of is a summary slide, okay? So if we go to 1.4 seconds, this is what it looks like. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, and you can stop and look at them if you want at your own pace. But remember, if a box shares a letter with another box, like Flametongue, Frostbrand, and Wind Fury all have a B above them, that means they aren't different from each other statistically. However, Rockbiter has an A, meaning that it is different from the all other 3. Another way to say that is Rockbiter is statistically significantly higher in DPS than the other 3 weapon imbues at 1.4 second speed. You can move to 1.6 seconds, things even out a little bit. Rockbiter is higher than Wind Fury, but Flametongue and Frostbrand are not different from either Rockbiter or Wind Fury. At 1.9 seconds, Rockbiter again is number 1. At 2.3 seconds, Rockbiter again is number 1. At 2.7 seconds, Rockbiter is the highest, but it's not significantly different from Frostbrand, but it is different from Flametongue and Wind Fury. At 2.9 seconds, Rockbiter and Wind Fury are top. They're not different from Frostbrand, but they are significantly higher than Flametongue. At 3.3 seconds, Rockbiter and Wind Fury again are number 1. Very similar scenario to the 2.9 seconds. At 3.5 seconds, Rockbiter is number 1, followed by Frostbrand and Wind Fury, followed by Flametongue, and finally at the slowest weapon speed, Rockbiter is number 1, followed by Wind Fury and Frostbrand. So as you can see, Rockbiter is consistently the highest DPS, highest average DPS across all the weapon speeds I tested. Wind Fury is probably the second highest, followed by Frostbrand, and Flame Tongue is pretty much left in the dust. You may be considering, is it even worth training Flame Tongue? And honestly, looking at these results, guys, I really don't think it's worth it. If you're worried about magical imbues, if you need a magical imbue for a really high armor target, use Frostbrand. I mean, you won't get it to level 20, but if you can save money while leveling, do it. And these are pretty interesting differences from private servers. Well, in private servers, I tested every single weapon speed, and there were no significant differences between weapon imbues. None, not a one. In the beta, there are clear differences between weapon imbues, with Rockbiter being the top, followed by Wind Fury. So, the slower the weapon speed, the more impact you're getting out of Wind Fury, the more potential impact you're getting out of Wind Fury. But again, if you value that consistency, Rockbiter is going to be your best bet. And this wasn't due to scaling or when I acquired these weapon imbues. I got the most recent Rockbiter level 34, I got Wind Fury at level 40, I got Flame Tongue at 36, and I got Frostbrand at 38. There was no correlation between when I learned them and the DPS output, mostly because of internal spell scaling. Remember, these are all being scaled internally, so they all should be at a consistent level. Again, what do you value? Do you value time of engagement? Do you value consistency? Do you value having the ability to one-hit someone? Slow consistency, Rockbiter. If you really want burst DPS, Wind Fury. And if you need a magical imbue for some reason, go with Frostbrand. That's my recommendation from the statistics and from the data that I gathered on the Classic WoW beta. Now let's cover totem mechanics. There are some core differences between private servers and the Classic WoW beta concerning totem mechanics, so let's go over one by one. First, Earthbind cutting is not as effective due to quote-unquote leeway. Now if you don't know what leeway is, I would definitely go to Perplexity's channel. He has a really interesting video.
Oh, trap beats are nice. I like trap. I really do. Even though I'm old. Like, see, there's WoW in action. Like some city girl shit.
Private servers. Just something to keep in mind. Another really interesting point is the Stoneclaw totem is much more robust compared to private servers. It seems a lot more tanky, and its taunt seems a lot more reliable. If you are in a situation where you need to kill more than one mob, definitely use Stoneclaw totem to get other mobs' attention and whittle one down first. Another really interesting thing is that totems can be cleaved. Now, originally in the Classic WoW beta, all AoE effects killed totems, and that was hard to deal with. But that was fixed. However, cleaves do kill totems. So say you're fighting a warrior, for some reason he cleaves you. If you're standing near a totem, the cleave will hit the totem as well and kill it. So it's something to keep in mind. But if there's no hot Cheetos, then it's not really ratchet. If you are dealing with it, you see the cleaves, just know that your totems are going to be cleaved as well. The next thing is that friendly totems and searing totem, their ranges aren't immediately on-off. And what I mean by that is you're probably used to putting a totem down, you go to some distance, it falls off, and you close that distance again, immediately comes back on, the buff comes back on. That isn't occurring. What's happening is you leave a totem at some range. In order to get back into the totem's range, you have to get much closer to it than you normally should. And this can be due to batching and server pain. We're not really sure what the mechanic is, but it is noticeable. And you can notice it with friendly totems, and you'll also notice it with searing totem. A mob has to get really close to searing totem for it to start activating. It's something that I've noticed, and it's something that is kind of interesting and also annoying sometimes, so just keep that in mind. Number 5, totem twisting is working great. So we were able to test this with Flame Tongue Totem and Frost Resistance Totem. You put Flame Tongue down, you replace Flame Tongue with Frost Resistance, and you have the Frost Resistance buff, and you still have Flame Tongue on your weapon. So that's working great, which means it'll work fine for Wind Fury and Race of Bears. So that's really good news for Enhancement Shaman and Shaman that can be totem twisting and raids. The next thing is that totems produce considerable amounts of threat. If you go to fight a mob and you drop down like a Magma Totem or a Searing Totem or a Fire Nova Totem, if you are attacking
there he is, Tauren Shaman. He is cow, and he is man.
It's kind of annoying when you're trying to screw up mobs and you're trying to AoE farm or you're trying to like use Fire Nova. You have to hit each mob and then drop your totem, and then it'll go off because they produce a certain amount of threat, and the mobs will attack them as soon as you put them down. Another weird thing is that totems can be healed, and I don't mean, okay, everyone knows you can target a totem, but I don't remember being able to heal totems. And as you see in the video clip, I'm chain healing, and the chain heal is bouncing to the totem. I hope this doesn't occur in raids. I mean, it shouldn't, because chain heal should be in its 1.12 state where it's a smart heal, so it shouldn't jump to something that has full health. But totems have less health than players, so I'm hoping this
it's like
doesn't happen
Spanish
and screw up in
blood,
raids, but something
right?
to keep in
And
mind.
the
The next
Spanish-
thing is that debuffs are
Spain was
removed
conquered
immediately
by-
upon putting a totem down. In private
Look,
servers, it was kind of wonky where you would place the
Arab-speaking
totem down and it wouldn't pulse right away and you wouldn't
peoples,
get
wasn't
rid of your
it?
debuff.
So,
Well, in this video, you
I
see
think a
poison
lot of
cleansing when I drop it down and
Latinos,
immediately wipes the
especially,
poison.
like,
I've also heard the Tremor does the same
tend
thing
to
with
look,
Fierce Sleeping Charm, so that's
Middle
great as
Eastern.
well. So just totems seem to be working immediately as soon as you place them down. Non-fire totems become an enemies if you're mind controlled. In this clip, you'll see that the priest is mind controlling the shaman, and those totems become the priest's minions,
if you're
you will.
bullshitting,
So something to keep in mind when you're dueling priests or fighting people
Tamales
that
are a
have
lot of
mind control
work. Like,
capability.
it's no
Another
fucking
interesting
joke,
thing
man.
is that enemy
You
NPCs
use a spoon
that
or
are
do you use
shaman-like
that new shit that they
NPCs,
came
like
out with?
Quillbore, let's
It's like
say,
new
their
technology.
totems persist after
It's a-
you
yeah,
kill
it's a lot
them.
of
Now,
work.
this isn't really a shaman totem thing, but I thought it was
Relax.
interesting
Oh,
to
yeah,
add
no,
in
so
here.
you
So you
know.
kill a Quillbore, and it's a
fun,
shaman-type
though.
Quillbore. The
It's worth
totems that it put down will still be there after you kill it. Stoneclaw totem does not remove stealth, even when the target is hit by the taunt. So in private servers, this did work. It was like a 0-hit attack or something, and it would take rogues out of stealth and druids out of stealth. This is not working on the beta. However, Magma Totem and Fire Nova can take players out of stealth.
Good.
Next is that Searing
That was
Totem
good.
and likely all fire totems follow the spell hit table and are subject to partial
Spend the day
resistances.
spooning.
So even though
it's
totems
with
aren't
tamales
considered
instead of your
spells when it comes to certain abilities and certain talents, they are considered spells when it goes to their hits. So a Searing Totem Fireball can be partially resisted if that mob or player has some fire resistance. The last thing is that cast sequence macros allow you to drop your totems in a sequence. You can set up a
Like
cast
Bobby
sequence
Brown.
macro, say drop
It's not
these 4
bad,
totems,
man.
and you hit
Bobby
that
Brown was
macro,
the
and
shit
it will
in the
put the 4
90s.
totems down or however many totems you put in the cast sequence macro. Moving on to
It's
talents,
mad.
spell, and stat mechanics. First one, clear casting or elemental focus occurs when the cast time is complete, not when the spell hits the target. So if you're casting lightning bolt, as soon as that lightning bolt cast is complete, you'll see the clear casting proc. This is actually better because then you can time when you want to use your chain lightning. So it'll be sooner, might increase DPS, considering that you'll know that clear casting is procced sooner. Next is that
Oh,
clear
okay, make sure
casting
the cast
or
is
elemental
complete.
focus does not interrupt your natural MP5 regen. So if you proc clear casting and you cast a spell, it won't interfere with your mana regen. Also very important. Flame Tongue and
Because it's a
Frostbrand
45-minute
weapon
video,
and
so I
Fire
figured I should
Totem
watch as much as
crits
I
do
can.
not proc elemental devastation. I kind of talked about this in the previous slide. Totems are not considered spells, but they are on the spell hit table, so they do not proc elemental devastation. So if you get a crit with a Flame Tongue weapon proc or a Fire Totem, you will not gain that effect. Next is that Lightning Shield will discharge if you're sapped. So this is kind of interesting, considering that some rogues are going to go into the talent that they can sap and remain in stealth. Well, you could get those rogues out of stealth if you have Lightning Shield on. Keep that in mind.
I got like halfway through. Dude, I gelled my baby hair like a real diva. It was an accident. I put oil on my face and it got in my hairs. But that's a nice observation, though. Thank you. I'm gonna get off, though. I'm gonna stream a little bit later, so thank you for following and thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. I'll see you soon. Bye. Good morning.